Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to this conversation on MEC and edge computing. This is part of a report by Senza Fili in collaboration with Arshai Wireless News. And today I'm talking to Dan Sahar, the founder and VP of Product Marketing at Quilt. Dan, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Mike. I'm happy to be here.
So, can you tell us what is that you do at Quilt in this area?
So Quilt was founded in 2010 with the object of basically helping service provider address the growth in online video. And streaming video was just starting back then with the likes of Netflix and YouTube, and that have obviously caused a major impact on service provider networks. And we realized that the best way to address that challenge was by basically changing the way that the broadband networks and mobile networks are built, and by trying to bring the content delivery function of those videos primarily a lot closer to where the consumers is, to where the subscriber is, and by doing that gain many efficiencies on multiple fronts, both on economic front as well as on quality of experience fronts. And the solution that we created is one that enables these service providers to do exactly that, to have, you could think of it as like the last line of content delivery that sits inside their network and is able to basically acquire content from a range of sources and deliver it in close proximity to where the users are.
And that's a major challenge, because video is the most difficult type of content to transfer over fixed or mobile networks. And can you tell us what you do to the content itself? How did it change throughout the years? What is it you do differently as you start from the time when you started on?
Yeah, so video was obviously the main, like the big elephant in the room, but there's been other types of contents over the years, and we see video evolving as well. I think one of the major things was the move first from progressive download into adaptive bitrate, and adaptive bitrate is probably the method that most of the streaming video providers use today, where progressive download is pretty much faded out. And I think the move that we're in right now is to take that adaptive bitrate, used both for live as well as for VOD content, and look at ways to optimize that delivery and to secure that delivery. We're seeing a growth in TLS-based, HTTPS-based delivery mediums, and our solution as a whole evolved to address both that as well as the changes on the transport and on the content side.
Mm-hmm. So now, to get started from the basics, we talk about edge computing as if everybody knows what the edge is. But how do you define the edge? Where is the proper location of the edge to optimize content delivery, video or other types of content?
Yeah. So we see the edge in primarily two locations. Inside the network, it would be the first IP location in the network. On the fixed line side, like in a cable network, that might be a CMTS location. It can be on the BRAS on the fixed line side. On the mobile side, it used to be at the SGI or GI level. We're seeing it move deeper towards the eNode B, like to the S1 interface. That would be like the first point of edge inside the network. The second place where the edge can play a role is on the device or at the home. So on the device, this can be essentially the handset and a software application running on the device. At the home, it can be a residential gateway, or even like an Apple TV or a Chromecast or an Amazon Echo that has some capability, some content delivery capability built inside of them. And there's obviously different characteristics for each one of these locations. Like some of them have more processing power, more storage. Others have less processing power, less storage, but also more, they're a lot closer to the consumer, so they bring more value to the entire value chain.
So how do you decide where, for a specific type of content or a content provider or service provider, where should they put their functionality? What is there an easy way to figure it out?
So I think there's no like one right answer for that. You could equate this to like the way that packages are delivered in the real world. Like you can have You can have US Post, you can have FedEx. Yeah, pretty soon you'll have drones delivering them to your home. They all get the package there on time, but some of them cost more. Others and each one of them has different capabilities. And I think this is like, it's a good analogy to how content delivery is done. Like there's some things that you can deliver from the centralized cloud, like take from an AWS data center, and other things where there's a lot more value to do them at the deep edge of the network. And we try to find a balance that has, ultimately it has to have an economic balance. So there has to be a benefit to the service provider to do this, to basically put these resources of compute and storage out, so they can leverage that content delivery can leverage these capabilities. And then you have to decide what goes in, what goes out, and what can come from the centralized cloud, what can come from the edge.
Yeah, and I want to get back to the business model, to the business case later. But before we get there, at the very beginning there was video over fixed, and then video over mobile. It was just a completely different thing. Just very short things, short videos, and very different. Is that still the case that we can make a clear distinction between fixed and mobile?
I think they're becoming like very, very much the same. I think you see, I think the operators are changing as video is also changing. And you look at on the consumer side, people watch videos on their mobile devices. It can be on Wi-Fi, but when they get out of their homes, they continue to watch the same videos. So it's basically, I think the content is becoming a lot more similar across the mediums. Maybe you have a bigger screen on one than on the other, but the content is not, it's not, there's some adaptation that you have to do for the screen. But other than that, the transport medium, the ABR formats, they're exactly the same on both types. And I think it's a good thing that basically the industry is becoming like one big industry that you can watch video wherever you are.
And I guess the expectations are also pretty much the same from the user perspective. So they're not willing to say, well, since it's mobile, it might not be as good quality. They expect the same good quality. Now, for you, what does it mean in terms of the sort of convergence of fixed and wireless? What does it mean for you in terms of the solutions you provide?
Yeah, so our solution has like two main components. One is the edge cloud nodes, the software that sits like inside the network, and then the other is like a cloud component that is, you could think of it as the control plane that decides how to basically delegate the traffic into those caches. Now, these edge cloud nodes can sit in a mobile side and they can sit in a fixed line side. What goes in them has to be location specific. So if I have a software node that sits on the fixed line side, obviously it will cache the content that is relevant for that part of the network. Like if you have an operator that has both mobile and fixed, maybe you'll have nodes that have the mobile formats for those videos. And if they're on the mobile side and the equivalent nodes on the fixed line side will have simply like encoding that is more suitable for Apple TV, for Chromecast, for more suitable for the residential devices. But the function will be very, very much the same.
And I guess that's good also for service providers that increasingly use both fixed and mobile from their end. So it's a better way for them to manage video and other content because it's a similar platform regardless of what they.
We look at it as the operators will have like a single platform that they can manage across both mobile and fixed, and this platform will also be able to address both the operator's own content if they have that content. Many operators have a video side to their business, as well as third-party content that comes over the internet, like also known as over-the-top content in some circles. One layer that will be able to address both of these, and basically there would be like a single resource that can handle, that can adapt. If an ISP has, a big launch of a new series, you can allocate the resource to that. If there's like a big live event going on over-the-top sources, the resources will shift to that.
So, and actually, you raise an important issue that who owns the content? It could be the service provider, it could be a third party, content distribution networks. So what is their role as we move more functionality to the edge? How is their role changing, or is it changing?
So the way that we see the edge in our solution is we help the service provider become part of the content delivery chain. There's other things that we help the service provider become part of the content delivery chain. Now, the way that we do that is we basically create an API that enables various content providers to make use of these resources. But the owner of the actual components, the storage and compute, is the service provider, and they have to decide how to make use of these resources. We give them the tools to do exactly that, to manage these resources. I think the understanding across the board on service provider is that there's not only going to be their content, there's going to be, like, consumers expect to have content from a range of sources, and the service providers have to build the best network that can handle them all.
So for the service provider, they retain control over how the content is transmitted, but at the same time, they need to work with anybody that provides that content to make sure that that's actually working as expected, right?
Exactly. I wouldn't say take control. I would say they participate in content delivery, because I think the current delivery medium is still very valid and is still going to be used. A lot of content is going to be streamed from the centralized cloud, but for some things that you could say the popular content or content that is, like, very latency sensitive, then you can put into play the resources that the service providers has. These are network resources that nobody else has. And basically, a content provider will have to decide which content to stream from the centralized cloud, which to try to delegate into the service provider. I think the operators can play a much bigger role than they do today in content delivery.
Right. So, and how is standardization's efforts like MEC and others like FOG, how are they helping or accelerating this trend?
I think there's technical challenges on several fronts. One is how, like, on the mobile side, is how to get a server function to be inside the mobile network. And I think MEC is doing a lot of work on that front. Basically, if you're going on the S1 interface, how are you going to take care of billing? How are you going to get into the GTP tunnels? A range of questions, you could think of them like inner working function questions. How do you put a server inside a mobile network? There's another set, and I think the MEC group is doing a great job on that front. There's another set of interfaces that have to be defined, which is, how do I, as a content provider, that I have like an SVOD offering on the internet, how can I make use of the resources? How does an ISP publish that even has a function that I can leverage? And we've been doing Quilt has been doing a lot of work on that front under the umbrella of a group called the Streaming Video Alliance, which is trying to create like that set of APIs, how content provider or a commercial CDN can make use of what we call an open caching function that sits inside this edge cloud that the service provider has.
So what have you learned so far as you've been working on this, and you've been working on this somewhat ahead of MEC, full standardization? What is it you've learned so far? So
I think it's a lot of balancing the needs of the entire ecosystem. Obviously, you have like a tricky situation where some service providers also compete to some extent with internet content providers. They both have video services, but there is the common understanding that the consumer is shared between the two. And I think there's a greater, I would say, maturity in the industry that now people are figuring out that the content providers, CDNs, and service providers have to work together to create like an infrastructure that will benefit everybody economically, but also quality-wise. And I think that's something that took many years to build. And when we started out, there was, I would say, some level of mistrust between the two sides. I think it's becoming a lot better now.
Yeah, and I think that's crucial because, as I said at the beginning, there was more. I guess there was a monetization issue. Who's going to get it? Is somebody getting a free ride? Who's getting? And I think that a lot of those issues are being gradually resolved. And so this is important to see all this standardization work ahead. Are you happy in terms of the different parts of the ecosystem that are involved? Do you think that there is now a balance? As you said, it seems like things are getting much better in that respect.
Yeah, I think it's growing. You see like several initiatives that are driving more collaboration. I think the streaming video lines that I mentioned earlier is one. You have the TIP project that Facebook is driving as another such initiative. But I think ultimately you see a far greater collaboration between the two sides that didn't exist before. And you know, it's kind of like an understanding that service providers have a lot to offer to the ecosystem, and they own assets that nobody else has. Like they own the network, they own real estate that frankly nobody else has. And the network has capabilities that are unique that you cannot just get anywhere. Like you could say multicast is something that if I'm an internet content provider, there's no way I can get my hands on multicast without a service provider to help me out. And then on the other side, you see a service provider understanding that content providers are what drive a lot more data into the network, which is good. And the consumers ultimately, that's what they consume. A lot more over the top content. So their network has to support that.
Yeah. So from your perspective at Quilt, what is that you feel you do that it's crucially needed and is different from everybody else?
So I think the first fundamental principle in Quilt was that we are at the edge. We've been deploying software at the edge of the network where there was never before like compute and storage. And we were one of the first companies to do that. And I think the edge has a lot of intricacies that maybe are not trivial to solve. And it's basically how do you have like a massively distributed nodes, software nodes that you have to manage? How do you really squeeze the most performance out of very limited compute and storage that you can have at the edge because of just like the real estate limitations. The other aspect is the ecosystem that we're building both technically as well as commercially with the content ecosystem, with content providers as well as CDNs. And I think we're ahead of the curve in terms of the APIs that are required to drive this collaboration. How, as I said, content providers and CDNs can make use of the edge cloud, of the open caching function that sits inside it.
Right. So yeah, let's move a little bit to the business case, because this is something that it's increasingly becoming a hot topic in edge computing. You obviously need to add more infrastructure at the edge, and that comes with a cost. It's true you get better performance, but what is the trade-off? So how do you look at the business case from your point of view?
So I think the business case, you have to look at who's gaining what from this edge computing model. And I think every bit that is streamed from the edge inside a service provider is a bit that doesn't have to cross the entire network and doesn't have to cross the core of the internet. It means that a service provider gains economic efficiency of streaming that bit from there instead of coming from a transit or a peering location. There's value there. The other value is consumer experience, because it's streamed there. There's a greater ability to overcome any bottlenecks in the network and much more latency as the content is streamed to the consumer. So that's the benefit both to the service provider in terms of churn experience that they're getting, but also to the content provider. And I think the content provider side, if people are striving towards like a full HD experience all the time without buffering, this is the way to do it. So there has to be, and that equates also to commercial CDNs that are the medium that many content providers use to distribute their content today. This gives them better reach in places that they cannot reach today with far lower latency. So there is a balance between the two things. Who is going to basically compensate each other for the balance? I think market will dictate how exactly that is done. But we found that equation balances itself out. Mm-hmm. And when we're streaming content from the edge, there's economic benefits across the board of the ecosystem.
Right, and so yeah, basically you can use the resources that are available in a more efficient way. do you see, in terms of like ownership and capex initial investment, an increasing role for from either the venue owner, the content providers, the CDNs to basically participate, because it's something where, as you say, they benefit from it as well as the service provider. So are they willing to step up and put some investment as well?
I think that's that's primarily something that will fall on the shoulders of the service providers as they're building their network. I think it's expected of them because that's what they do. They build great networks, and this edge computing is, you could say, it's like the move from traditional networking into networking that uses storage and compute. And so it's basically shifting resources from one place to another place. I think both them and venue owners are the ones that are going to be responsible for building out that infrastructure. But there's ways for them to gain more benefits. I think over the long term, that's a far more economic way to build networks than simply to throw routers at this problem.
Right. But I guess the venue owners also, as you mentioned, are going to have a wider role, because a lot of the infrastructure would be covered in their premises. A lot of services that are going to be location based, or content that is location based. Think of a stadium. So how do you see their role changing in this process as we move functionality towards the edge?
I can't really answer that question. I think I haven't thought about that question.
Okay, no problem.
Skip that question.
No comment. Let's move to the to what you're currently working on right now, and as we move forward, move to on the mobile side to 5G. Standardization. There's a lot of standardization, a lot of work going on. And what is that you are focusing your attention on these days to get ready for the challenges over the next 5 years?
So our focus, I would say, is on two fronts. One is, with the technological front, is basically to create standardization around the APIs that are required to enable this open caching function inside the edge cloud, and manifest that into our product as well, and basically have the ability to have a range of APIs that the content ecosystem can use. Increase our capabilities when it comes to service providers' own content. And then on the ecosystem side, we're trying to enhance our content provider and CDN relationship so that they can make use of this edge cloud layer that sits inside the service provider.
Excellent. Well, sounds like there's a lot to do, a lot of exciting new things coming up. Dan, thanks for being with us today, sharing your thoughts on this.
Thanks a lot.
So this was a conversation for a report of MEC and Edge Computing by Senza Fili in collaboration with RCR Wireless News. And I would like to thank you all for listening in.